The night before the wedding, Jonah said that he would divorce me in a year. I asked him why. He said, "After being together for 7 years, I've long lost my love for you and all that's left is responsibility. The only compensation I can think of is to give you the identity of Mrs. Jonah first." I didn't argue or make a fuss and accepted it calmly. He gave me a surprised look but didn't say anything more. The next day, after finding out that I had run away from the wedding, he smiled and dealt with the elders from both families. He looked at me as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Until I took his hand and placed it in the hand of his female secretary myself. The man who had always been cold to me finally became anxious. In the lively banquet hall, wine cups were being passed around. I carried a high-end custom-made bag, wore sunglasses, and walked slowly into the hall. 2 hours ago, I received a message from Ivy. "Anastasia, Jonah is celebrating my birthday at Jinfulu today. You're welcome to come and have fun." Through these words, I could imagine what a smug expression she must have had on her face when she sent this message. Did she think I would be provoked? If it had been half a year ago, I might have slapped Ivy hard a few times to let her experience what it was like to be dominated by the legitimate wife. But now, I wouldn't do that. I even went to the beauty salon in a leisurely mood. Men might betray me. But money wouldn't. And the beauty bought with money wouldn't either. At this moment, I stood in the banquet hall with a radiant look. Jonah had already been invited onto the stage by Ivy. Under the coaxing of the crowd, the two of them lifted a big knife together to cut the cake. After cutting it, they hugged each other tightly like a couple. With the atmosphere so lively, someone started shouting, "Jonah, Ivy. Kiss." Ivy looked at Jonah shyly and hesitantly, as if she wanted to say something but held back. "Jonah." And Jonah lived up to everyone's expectations. He gently kissed Ivy's forehead as if she were a precious treasure. After the applause died down, I watched Ivy's eyes, which were glistening with tears of emotion, and walked gracefully forward. The moment he saw me, Jonah was flustered for a moment and then he frowned. "Anastasia, what are you doing here?" But I didn't even look at him. I just stared at Ivy. In the next moment, I suddenly smiled. Lightly, yet extremely solemnly, I took Jonah's hand and placed it in Ivy's hand. "Miss Sue, since you enthusiastically invited me to come and play, I wouldn't want to disappoint you. I came in a hurry and didn't prepare a gift. So I'll give you this." I gave Jonah away as a congratulatory gift in front of everyone. Those in the audience who knew that I was still Jonah's fiancée didn't dare to breathe loudly. "Enough. Anastasia, there should be a limit to your nonsense." Jonah seemed to feel that he had been insulted. He pulled his hand out of Ivy's palm, his tone angry. I took a casual look at him. My eyes were calm, without a trace of emotion. "I'm not being ridiculous. The only gift I can think of for Miss Sue now is the identity of Mrs. Jonah." Hearing this, Jonah stared at me blankly. The emotions in his eyes were unclear. When Anastasia was 17 years old, she made the same wish every year on her birthday, to reach the legal marriage age as soon as possible and become Jonah's wife. Half a year ago, 24-year-old Anastasia had almost realized this wish. However, the night before the wedding, Jonah personally shattered my dream. At that time, he was sitting in the chair he used to sit in. "Anastasia, I will divorce you in a year." His tone was flat and natural, as if he were discussing with me whether the weather would be suitable for the wedding tomorrow. I couldn't believe it and asked, "Why?" He looked at me with his emotionless eyes, without a hint of emotion. "After being together for 7 years, I feel that I've long lost my love for you and all that's left is responsibility. The only compensation I can think of is to give you the identity of Mrs. Jonah first." Hearing this, I was stunned for a few seconds, and then I laughed nervously. Jonah and I were childhood sweethearts, and our two families were neighbors. He was good-looking. Since I was a child, I liked to pester him. I followed him around for 17 years. Finally, on his 17th birthday, I turned him from a childhood friend into my boyfriend. Did he like me? I thought he did. Otherwise, in the first year of high school, why would he be so angry that he wouldn't talk to me for several days when he saw someone giving me a love letter? Otherwise, in the first year of work, when he saw me getting out of a male colleague's car, why would he pull me behind him with a gloomy face and look at that person with a warning in his eyes? Thinking back on the proofs that he had loved me, my vision couldn't help but become blurred. Seeing that I was crying, Jonah habitually reached out his hand, wanting to wipe away my tears. I avoided it. He looked surprised and withdrew his hand. "Anastasia, forgive me. Just think of me as a bad person at heart. How could a marriage be maintained without love? But don't worry. Anyway, I won't run away from tomorrow's wedding." After saying that, he reached out and touched my hair. I didn't respond. Jonah seemed to think that I had accepted his approach and sighed slightly before leaving. The moment the door closed, I raised my head. Looking at the delicate hairpins and rings placed on the dressing table, I had the urge to sweep them all to the ground. But I didn't. Like a walking corpse, I took off my bright red pajamas, sent Jonah a text message saying, "I won't go to tomorrow's wedding. Let's break off the engagement," and then fled from home. I didn't even bring my ID card. That night, I drove my car to the riverside and blew the cold wind there all night. I stayed by the river until noon before going home. Mom, Dad, Jonah, and his parents were all sitting on the sofas in the living room of my house. Seeing me, Mom immediately rushed over. After looking me up and down several times, she said resentfully, "You naughty girl. Even if you're so happy to marry Jonah, you don't have to do this." I opened my mouth, just about to speak. Jonah ran over and gently put his arm around my waist. "Auntie, don't blame Anastasia. It's all my fault. Mom didn't like Jonah before." Later, with my constant praise day and night, she became more and more satisfied with Jonah. Hearing what Jonah said, she immediately put on a smiling face, with an air of, "If it weren't for Jonah, I would surely punish you." After the crowd dispersed, Jonah took his arm off my waist. "Anastasia, what are you fooling around for? I've already said that I'll make you Mrs. Jonah. Why are you still?" He was full of confusion. It seemed that he really didn't understand why I had chosen to run away from the wedding. I reached out my hand and gently stroked his eyebrows as I used to. "Jonah, if we're doomed to divorce in a year, then there's actually no need to continue this engagement. What do you think?" He frowned. "Why isn't there a need? The Hanlon alliance is a plus for both of our families' companies." Hearing this, I smiled, but tears also flowed down from the corners of my eyes. "Then just wait, Jonah. We won't have the day when we enter the Civil Affairs Bureau." Jonah was stunned. "Anastasia, what do you mean?" "It means that the engagement can continue, but from now on, we'll each do our own thing." Jonah was both angry and amused. "You've been following me around for 24 years. Can you really do that?" There was a hint of hidden complacency in his tone. He thought he knew me very well. But he didn't know. Some women are tough on themselves when they're chasing someone. Once they're completely disappointed and choose to give up, they're even tougher on themselves. That day, Jonah and I parted on bad terms. I endured not contacting him. But the day after he went back, he made a big fuss about hiring a personal secretary. The girl's name was Ivy. She had just graduated from university, was pretty, and Jonah doted on her a lot. He started taking Ivy to all kinds of important occasions and even allowed her to enter and leave our wedding house. When Ivy sent the message, I was looking through the old photos one by one. "Anastasia, I'm Ivy, the secretary of President Jonah. We're at the villa on Chunway Road. Do you remember where President Jonah's blue shirt is?" Chunway Road. That was our wedding house. He had taken another woman there. When I realized this, I felt a sharp pain in my heart. I thought, it's not enough. It should hurt more. I directly called Jonah. "Did you take Ivy to our wedding house?" The person on the other end of the phone chuckled. "Yes." I fell silent. The withdrawal symptoms made a sour feeling well up in my heart uncontrollably. I wanted to cry. But thinking of the person on the other end, I forcibly held back the surging tears. Jonah didn't say anything either. We just remained silent like this. A few minutes passed, and the depressing emotion lingering in my heart gradually dissipated. "All right, I won't go to that house anymore." After hanging up the phone, I stared at the ceiling in a daze for a long time. In the first 24 years of my life, I had always revolved around Jonah. I was happy when he was happy and sad when he was sad. To completely get rid of him, I didn't know how long it would take me. But I had to take action. After that day, I started to make myself busy. In the past, Mom and Dad always asked me to learn to manage the company, but I didn't want to. I thought, anyway, there was Jonah. Now that I think about it, I was really so blindly in love back then. So, I took the initiative to tell Dad that I wanted to learn from him. Dad happily agreed. The fact that I was interning in my own family's company was somehow spread to Jonah. The person who hadn't contacted me voluntarily since our last quarrel actually took the initiative to call me. "Anastasia, I've already forbidden Ivy to enter our wedding house. At that time, I was so dizzy from reading the documents that it took me a while to remember to respond to him. Oh. Jonah was stunned for a few seconds before continuing, if you mind, it's not impossible for me to prepare another set on my side. I frowned and turned over a page. Do as you like. What was written here? I knew every word, but I couldn't understand them when they were put together. I couldn't understand. I was so annoyed. Jonah was also angered by my casual attitude. Anastasia, I've already been so humble. What else do you want from me? Being too aloof for too long is not good. You know that? Aloof? I took my eyes off the document, thought for a second with my brain, confirmed that I was just too busy to talk to him, and then sighed slightly. If you think I'm being aloof, then think so. Snap. It was quiet around my ears. When I let out a sigh of relief, I was completely stunned. Since when had I become impatient with Jonah? The influence that Jonah had on me was gradually decreasing. However, he himself didn't seem to realize it. It was as if he was taking revenge. He attended various important occasions with Ivy in a more high-profile manner. The story that he spent a fortune at an auction just to make the beauty smile quickly spread throughout the whole circle. Before long, someone anonymously sent me a video. When a rich second-generation kid teased Jonah, asking if he was worried that his fiancée would mind since he had made such a big fuss, Jonah took a sip of wine in silence and then smiled complacently. She's very obedient. She won't make a fuss with me. The private room was silent for a moment. Then many people chimed in. Yes, yes, yes. Who is President Jonah? He's the one who has had the ability to make Miss Anastasia follow him around since childhood, and it's been like that for decades. Looking at him in the video with that confident look, I mocked, Jonah, I once gave you this confidence. Now, I'm going to take it back step by step. Originally, because of the jointly developed real estate projects, the marriage alliance between the Lin and Han families was as solid as a rock. But someone couldn't wait. That day, just as I walked out of my father's office, I received a text message from Ivy. She invited me to her birthday party? How overconfident of her. I sneered but still went to the party. When he saw me, Jonah panicked for a moment, but quickly calmed down. Did he think that I would be like those women who couldn't get the man they loved and would attack the third party? That was something only a fool would do. So Jonah would never have thought that I came empty-handed. But I gave him as a gift to Ivy. Jonah didn't say a word, and his face looked very ugly. He stared at me tightly for a long time. The embarrassment in his eyes faded away, leaving only confusion and scrutiny. I didn't avoid his gaze at all and stared back at him. After a while, he seemed to choose to compromise. Anastasia, take back what you said. I still didn't move. The veins on his forehead gradually showed up, and his voice suddenly rose. I'm telling you, take it back. Otherwise, you won't be able to afford the consequences. The lively venue was silent at this moment. Ivy seemed to be frightened. She shrank back and didn't dare to breathe. So my laughter sounded so abrupt in the silent venue. I looked at Ivy, who was hugging Jonah tightly as if she wanted to merge with him, and said mockingly, President Jonah, now that you have the beauty in your arms, my gift should be quite to your liking, right? As for the consequences? President Jonah, tell me, what consequences could I, Anastasia, not afford? Hearing this, Jonah's pupils dilated for a moment. He took one last look at me, pulled Ivy along, and a smug smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Anastasia. Tomorrow, I'll go to the Anastasia family to break off our engagement. As long as you admit your mistake to me now, But I didn't give him the chance to finish his words. Fine. At this, Han was completely stunned. That smug smile still lingered on his lips, still warm. But anyone with a discerning eye could see. He realized that he had gone too far. Taking advantage of his daze, I turned around and left. A male voice came from behind, I really will go to break off the engagement. Hearing this, I touched my chest and confirmed that there wasn't even a ripple of emotion there. At that moment, I knew that after 24 years of acquaintance and 7 years of relationship, I had completely let it go. To celebrate, I planned to go to the quiet bar opened by my friend and have a drink. But just as I walked into the hotel lobby, I was held up by an unexpected incident. A tall and lanky guy was shrinking his body and standing in the corner like a quail, crying with his eyes red. There was a fierce-looking person standing in front of him. Get out of here as soon as possible. It's no use begging me. If you've offended Mr. Chen, you're in for it. Don't. Supervisor. I beg you. My grandma at home is sick. She's still waiting for me to earn money to save her life. Please, what does your family's trouble have to do with me? Hurry up and leave. The supervisor left. The boy crouched down tremblingly. He seemed to have lost his soul and stared blankly into the void. Looking at him like this, my feet that were originally heading for the door suddenly turned in a different direction out of my control. I walked up to him. But he didn't seem to notice. So I crouched down to be at eye level with him. What's your name? How old are you? What's your educational background? Would you like to come and work for me? I asked 4 questions in a row, and then the boy finally raised his head. His eyes were like obsidian. So bright, I thought to myself. Leo. 22 years old, a senior at Jiangqing University. Leo? The name seemed a bit, strangely familiar. Sister, can I really come and work for you? I smiled. Sure, I need a bodyguard. Do you want to do it? The salary is quite good. I lied without changing my expression. Since I was a child, my father had made me learn judo and sanda. It was no problem for me to beat 2 men down. I actually didn't need a bodyguard at all. But I had just joined the company and was still in the learning stage myself. It wouldn't be good to give Leo special treatment. I could only create a job position for him. I touched my nose, feeling a bit embarrassed for lying. Yes. Sister, I can be your bodyguard. Thank you for offering me this job. I'll risk my life to protect you, sister. The tall and big boy smiled. The dimples at the corners of his mouth were faintly visible. Jonah had extremely good-looking features. I thought that after more than 20 years of life experiences, I should have been immune to good looks. But at that moment, I was stunned when I looked at that face. Jonah didn't come to break off the engagement in the end. But I didn't care at all what he thought. I told my father about Leo, and he tapped my nose. You girl, aren't you afraid of helping someone with ulterior motives? Having said that, my old father still turned around and asked a private detective to investigate Leo. The detective was very efficient. On the second night, my father handed me Leo's information. I took a look and curled the corners of my mouth. The information on the paper was exactly the same as what Leo had said. On the second day after confirming that Leo's identity was okay, he officially started working. I used my own pocket money to prepay him a month's salary, which was 20,000 yuan. He was an honest kid. He immediately returned half of it to me. I don't deserve this salary. I put on a straight face and transferred it back to him. If you don't take the money, then don't work. He stared at me silently. His eyes became brighter and brighter. After a while, he said in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Sister Anastasia." Leo accepted the money. It seemed that in order to make me feel that the money was well spent, he took over almost every aspect of my life. He came to my house early in the morning to prepare breakfast and lunch. After eating, he drove my car to pick me up and send me to work. After getting along for a while, I found that he was actually very smart. Sometimes when I was looking at the project proposals done by my predecessors and couldn't understand some parts, he could even explain them in simple terms. At the moment when I suddenly understood, once, I couldn't help jumping up from the sofa, hugging Leo's head, and stroking it affectionately. I really wish I had a brain like yours, Anastasia. He blushed and pushed me away. His eyes didn't seem to know where to look. I suddenly realized. Just now, I had pushed his head towards my. Within a second, my face flushed with blood and became extremely hot. Cough, cough, cough. I suddenly remembered that I still have something to do. Let's stop here for today. I'm going to bed. At the moment when I turned my back, my facial expressions couldn't help going wild. Slap. I slapped myself. Anastasia. What on earth did you do? Even when I went back to my room, the heat on my face still didn't fade away. I was blushing on my own. I don't know how long it had passed when there was a knock on the door. Come in. Leo stood outside the door. I looked at him, pretending that nothing had happened just now, and forced myself to suppress my shame and said, "Why haven't you gone home yet?" "I'm just about to leave. I came to say goodbye." Seeing that I didn't look well, he asked cautiously, "What's wrong?" I sniffed and said, "Nothing." After a pause, I continued, "Tomorrow is the weekend. Do you have any plans? Do you need to go to the hospital to see your grandma?" He was stunned. He didn't seem to react. It was several seconds later that he said, "No, I don't need to. I go to accompany her every night." You asked this. Do you have any plans for tomorrow? I nodded. I want to go out for a walk. Leo took a step forward directly. I'll accompany you. For some reason, I saw a hint of expectation on his face. How could there be an employee so enthusiastic? I couldn't help laughing. Will you be available whenever I call you? I spent 20,000 yuan. Why do I feel like I bought out your 24 hours a day? He seemed to curl the corners of his mouth, looking very happy. You should rest first. Tomorrow morning, I'll come to pick you up. Before closing the door, he suddenly looked at me, with his eyebrows raised. Sweet dreams, Anastasia. I was stunned for a second. Was that guy just flirting with me? The next day, while I was still asleep, Leo arrived at my house. Anastasia, get up quickly. If we're late, we won't be able to get a good spot. What are we doing? I yawned, looking sleepy. Camping. I've got everything ready and put it in the car. When you're ready, we can set off. Camping? Something new. Suddenly, I became interested, and my speed of washing up became much faster. When everything was ready, I sat in the passenger seat and watched Leo drive the car with ease. I couldn't help patting his arm. Good job. You've prepared well. It must be very happy to be your girlfriend. When you're out, you take care of everything. He smiled and looked at me. That look made my intention to tease him disappear completely. Just then, my cell phone rang, relieving the awkwardness in my heart. Finding that it was Jonah, I didn't pay much attention and directly pressed the answer button. What do you want? My tone was calm and emotionless, as if the person on the other end was a complete stranger. Was it you who did that thing online? Hearing Jonah's accusatory tone as soon as he opened his mouth, I was confused. Anastasia, you're a rich young lady. You don't have to struggle since you were born and can have a lot of things. Why do you have to make things difficult for a nobody like Ivy? Do you know that now people on the internet are scolding Ivy for being a mistress, saying that she was overconfident and dared to show off in front of the real wife and deserved to be searched by netizens? You should quickly record a statement, saying that you know that Ivy and I are actually friends and that on her birthday, you were just joking. Hearing this, my confused mind finally sorted out a bit of thought. So it was for Ivy. I stopped him immediately. Jonah, are you deliberately trying to make me unhappy now? I'm targeting Ivy? And record a video statement to clear her wrongdoing? Who does she think she is? Were the netizens wrong to scold her for being a mistress? If you haven't woken up in the early morning, go back to sleep. Don't go around biting people when your brain doesn't have enough blood supply. You're a human being, not a dog. I was just about to hang up the phone when Leo suddenly used a toothpick to pick up a piece of fruit and brought it to my mouth. The car had already stopped. I looked at Leo and didn't open my mouth. He was stubborn and continued to bring it to my mouth. Just have a taste. Just this once. I could only refuse. No, thanks. This piece is too big. I can't eat it. It wasn't until an angry shout came from the other end of the phone that I realized that what I said was ambiguous. Anastasia. In the early morning, why is there a man's voice in your bed? What are you doing? Seeing Leo's face turn bright red, I forced myself to suppress my shame and shouted at the person on the other end, it's none of your business what I'm doing. With a snap, I hung up the phone. Leo's hand had already been withdrawn. I felt a bit uncomfortable. Are we there? Yes. Then let's get out of the car. Not daring to look at Leo's face again, I jumped out of the car as if fleeing and rushed to the trunk to get things. Jonah stared at his phone with the screen gone black, completely stunned as he sat on the bed. Anastasia had hung up on him. And she was in bed with another man. He shook his head vigorously. When she was with me, even a kiss would make her blush all over with shyness. How could she? His head ached terribly. Last night, due to business entertainment, he had drunk a lot of alcohol. Although Ivy helped him, he was really not used to having a woman shielding him in the front. After having the first glass, there came the second and the third. By the time the entertainment ended, it was already too late. Jonah thought that it wouldn't be safe for Ivy to go home alone, so he asked her to stay in his apartment. Unexpectedly, the paparazzi were so good at taking snapshots. They actually captured photos of Ivy and Jonah helping each other and not returning home that night. This morning, Jonah was woken up by the vibration of his phone. His Weibo was full of messages tagging him, and the little red dots on WeChat showed a conspicuous 99+. When he clicked in to take a look, there were countless types of comments, including those making fun, blaming, congratulating, and just watching the fun. His mother even made a series of continuous calls. When she found that the calls couldn't get through, she directly bombarded him with messages. If you don't like Anastasia, be responsible and break off this engagement. How could I give birth to a son as shameless as you? He endured the headache and sorted out the whole story of what had happened. Only then did he realize that the story of him and Ivy having an affair had been exposed. Shortly after that, someone recorded everything that happened on Ivy's birthday many days ago and put it online. After a night of fermentation, Ivy's Weibo was flooded with attacks. The comment section was in turmoil, with continuous cursing remarks like homewrecker, having no moral bottom line, lock up this scumbag and slut, the legitimate wife is so unlucky. To be honest, in this video, the counterattack of the legitimate wife makes me feel surprisingly good. If you don't love me, I'll leave you. I don't want you anymore. Ivy didn't seem to have woken up yet. Jonah looked at these comments alone, and his headache seemed to get even worse because of anger. He couldn't tell whether he was angry because Ivy was being cursed or whether he was hit hard by the netizens' comment, she doesn't want you anymore. When he was young, he had envisioned that he would grow old with Anastasia. As time passed and his youth faded away, he had also envisioned that although he no longer loved Anastasia, he would still marry her and give her the identity of Mrs. Jonah. Until the night when he proposed to divorce a year later, what he had envisioned was that he would leave Anastasia first because he didn't like her anymore. However, he had never thought that one day Anastasia would leave him first. That she would abandon their 24-year relationship and not want him anymore. When he realized this, Jonah's heart suddenly felt as if it had been pinched by ants. And that pain should have lasted only for a moment. But it seemed to spread like radiation, quickly spreading to his entire heart. He didn't know what was going on. All he knew was that he was very uncomfortable. He really wanted to listen to Anastasia's voice as he used to. But what reason could he use to contact Anastasia? Jonah searched in his mind for a long time and finally decided to directly use the matter of Ivy being cyberbullied as an excuse. The moment the call was connected, what Jonah actually wanted to say was that all the information on the internet was false. But after opening his mouth, it turned into an interrogation. He interrogated his fiancée because of a secretary. As soon as the words came out, Jonah regretted it. But his pride made him unwilling to back down. Finally, it led to this embarrassing result. Thinking of the male voice that appeared on Anastasia's phone, Jonah couldn't sit still any longer. He staggered out of bed, quickly washed up, picked up his car keys, and was about to rush out. The moment he opened the door, Ivy rubbed her eyes and came out of the second bedroom. Jonah. This address, which usually didn't seem to be a problem, somehow made Jonah feel strange at this moment. However, he didn't realize the existence of the problem. He nodded slightly and told her, "Stay here recently. Don't go out and don't look at your phone." After saying that, he closed the door. On Saturday morning, there weren't many cars on the road. Jonah overtook cars all the way and rushed to the apartment that Anastasia bought outside at the fastest speed. But after pressing the doorbell for a long time, there was no response at all. He then called Anastasia's parents. Out of courtesy, they answered. But they didn't know where Anastasia had gone either. After hanging up the phone, Jonah looked at his phone and suddenly didn't know who to contact to find Anastasia. Having lived for 24 years, for the first time, he truly experienced that when something established got out of control, it could be so uncomfortable. Was the little girl who had followed him around since childhood really going to abandon him? Jonah sat in the car, waiting from morning till night. When there were cigarette butts all over the clean ground, he finally saw Anastasia. He wanted to rush down, but when he saw Anastasia tiptoeing to kiss that man, he was completely frozen there. Until the two of them walked into the apartment together, he didn't go down. But like a masochist, he kept waiting downstairs. Until 11 o'clock, when he saw Leo coming out of the building, he rubbed his forehead which was throbbing violently and drove away. When getting out of the car, Leo was suddenly blinded by a gust of windblown sand. Seeing him raise his hand as if he wanted to rub his eyes, I quickly stopped him. "Don't rub. Come here. Let me blow it for you." He obediently put down his hand. However, Leo was so tall that when I stood there, I couldn't reach his eyes at all. "Lower your head a bit." There was a soft chuckle from above. In the next moment, he obediently bent down a little and automatically adjusted the height to just the right position. I leaned over and blew gently a few times. Finding that his eyes were moving around restlessly, I couldn't help scolding, "Where are you looking? If you don't cooperate, I won't help you anymore." Leo shifted his gaze back. I blew a few more times, and then he said, "It's okay now." I looked up and saw that his eyes indeed didn't shed tears anymore, and I let out a sigh of relief. After coming back from camping, I was in a much better mood. Leo, because he had to be busy with his thesis and graduation defense, started running among my home, the hospital, and the school. In just 1 week, he had lost quite a lot of weight. "If you're tired, I'll give you a break for a while." However, he shook his head and handed me the freshly washed cherry tomatoes. "I don't feel tired at all when I'm with you." He looked at me with those dark and bright eyes. His gaze made my face flush. Don't you want to have some private space of your own?" To hide my embarrassment, I lowered my head and didn't dare to let him look at my face anymore. But Leo, who was usually obedient, became rebellious at this moment. He reached out and lifted my head. "Anastasia, I've shown it so obviously. Can't you really tell?" His gaze suddenly met mine. Fragmented yet intense love slowly flowed from those eyes into my heart. My heart was pounding, but I cowardly fled. "I'm suddenly a bit sleepy." After saying that, I yawned in an ungraceful way and left Leo alone in the living room. After hiding in the bedroom, I touched my burning cheeks. "Anastasia, you're doomed. You've fallen in love." The next day, I was both looking forward to seeing Leo and a bit afraid of it. But after waiting for a long time, Leo didn't show up. I opened my phone. It was quiet. There were neither missed calls nor messages. But he had always been punctual. After thinking for a few seconds, I still dialed his number. No one answered. I wasn't willing to give up. I dialed again. This time, the call was connected. "Hello, Leo?" There was some crackling noise on the other side and no one spoke. A bad premonition rose in my heart and I shouted louder, "Leo?" This time someone spoke, but my heart sank. "Eternal love?" The contact note is so mushy. The man with a rough voice said to me, "I heard that Miss Anastasia has been very fond of this pretty boy recently. Well, here's the deal. 1 million yuan, at the suburban warehouse. Cash on delivery. If you dare to call the police, I'll kill him." I quickly said, "Don't do anything to him. I'll give you the money." The other side laughed loudly. I took a bank card and drove at full speed towards the western suburbs. I didn't forget to send a message to my parents. After receiving the bank card deduction message, "Call the police immediately." When I got there, I saw Leo lying on the ground with blood all over his face, motionless. My heart trembled. "Leo? Leo? Wake up and answer me." He still didn't move. "What have you done to him?" Anger rose in my heart. "Didn't I tell you not to hurt him? Since you didn't listen, then don't even think about getting the money, and you won't be able to leave easily either." After that, I became a completely irrational madwoman and went all out. There weren't many of them, and I seemed to have a buff, attacking vigorously. After a few rounds, all 4 of them were knocked down by me, lying on the ground, wailing everywhere. One of them covered his bleeding head and mumbled inarticulately, "I'm going to call the police. I'm going to hire a lawyer and sue this woman to death. Sue her for excessive defense. Sue her for intentional injury." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of police sirens rang out appropriately. I helped Leo up from the ground and gave the unconscious kidnappers lying on the ground another hard kick. After Leo and those people were all sent to the hospital for treatment, I was taken to the police station. After finishing the record, as soon as I walked out of the police station, I was hugged tightly by someone. "Anastasia, it's great that you're okay." I frowned. "Jonah, you're hurting me." The strength in his hands lessened a bit, but he still held me tightly in his arms. Taking advantage of his inattention, I broke free. "Were you following me?" I asked coldly. "No, it was Xiaowu who called and told me that you were sent to the police station because of hitting people." I was worried. "Worried about what?" I retorted. "Worried that if something happened to me, it would be difficult for you to break off the engagement smoothly? Since you're in such a hurry, then let's go to my home and settle this matter now. I've already mentioned it to my parents, and they agreed." Jonah didn't say anything. He just stared at me blankly. "Do you really want to break off the engagement?" "Yes. Besides, wasn't it you who always talked about breaking off the engagement before? I'm fulfilling your wish. You should be very happy." Jonah avoided talking about the stupid things he had done before. "Is it because of that pretty boy Leo?" I turned my head away, not wanting to talk to him, which was also a kind of acquiescence. Seeing me like this, Jonah showed a look of being betrayed by someone he trusted and was on the verge of breaking down. Anastasia. We've known each other for 24 years and been together for 7 years. Are you just going to abandon this relationship like this? How could you be so heartless? I rolled my eyes. It was like talking to a brick wall. I was almost too lazy to talk to him. Whatever you say. Just then, a taxi came along the roadside. I quickly got into the back seat of the taxi. Driver. To the hospital. Please hurry. 1 month later, Leo's head has recovered from the after effects of the concussion. The project jointly cooperated by the Lin and Han families has finally entered the final stage. During this period, Jonah, who had been shouting about breaking off the engagement, never took any actual actions. However, if he didn't act, I would. I took my parents and the tokens of our engagement and rushed to the Han family's house while Jonah was away. Under the persuasion of my parents, who appealed to their emotions and reasoned with them, Jonah's parents sighed and finally agreed to break off the engagement. Uncle Han looked at me and said with a bit of pity, Anastasia, we know that Jonah has done a lot of absurd things in the past 6 months, but he has already changed now. I promise that he will never act foolishly again in the future. You two have a 24-year relationship here. Are you really unable to give him another chance? I shook my head. Uncle, I can't tolerate any flaw in this regard. Besides, I already have someone I like now, and I don't want to make him feel wronged either. The kidnapping incident made me realize for the first time that Leo's position in my heart had become so important. On that day, when he was sent to the hospital for treatment in the ambulance, he tightly held my hand. With blood all over his head and face, he asked me stubbornly, you beat them up like that for me. You also have feelings for me in your heart, right? Anastasia, I like you. After I'm discharged from the hospital, can you be my girlfriend? I agreed. So now, after getting rid of the identity of Jonah's fiancée, I'm Leo's girlfriend. When Jonah learned that the marriage was completely over, he stood downstairs of my house in the heavy rain. I didn't want to bother with it, so I simply took Ivy out of the blacklist. An hour later, she took a taxi and rushed over. She dragged the fainted Jonah back home by force. Seeing Jonah's figure completely disappear downstairs of my house, Leo on the other end of the phone said, Anastasia, is Jonah still pestering you? I took a look at him. Obviously his eyes were fixed on the computer, but he still had the mind to pay attention to my situation here. I asked Ivy to take him away. Why did you video call me? Didn't you say that you didn't want to be distracted during the period of writing your thesis? I said in a teasing tone. The sound of typing on the other side in the city disappeared for a moment. He looked around and suddenly moved closer to the phone. His handsome face suddenly enlarged and appeared in front of the screen. I miss you. Looking into his eyes. My heart was beating violently and I thought to myself, sincerity is indeed always the ultimate killer move. On the day when Leo finished his thesis defense, he proposed to me in one go. I was also quite cooperative and took him directly home. Dad didn't think much of Leo at first, but he managed to persuade my dad just by having a meal and spending some time drinking tea in the study. When we walked out of the house, my parents' address for him had changed from Mr. Jiang to Leo. I stood aside, hugged his arm, and smiled happily. On the day when we planned to get the marriage certificate, just as we arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau, a colleague suddenly sent me a Weibo link. Anastasia, is what's said on this true? I clicked on it and took a look. It turned out that Ivy was causing trouble again. I'm so happy that I've finally waited for this day. On the ring finger of her left hand, there was a diamond ring. Taking a closer look, it was a pair with the ring on the blurred hands in the background. And those hands, I could tell at a glance, belonged to Jonah. So was this? Jonah proposed to her? I looked at it expressionlessly and was about to close the interface when my finger accidentally slid to the comment section below. It made me laugh angrily. The overall trend in the comments section actually implied that I was the mistress in the relationship between Ivy and Jonah. It implied that the reason she was publicly criticized by netizens some time ago was that I was bullying others with my power. I simply replied to my colleague with 2 words, false. I knew clearly in my heart. Those comments for whitewashing were most likely bought by paid posters. Then how are you going to fight back? The colleague asked again. Later. I directly took out my phone, turned Leo's face around, took 8 intimate photos, and then took a photo of the Civil Affairs Bureau. I combined them into a 9-square grid and posted them on Weibo. Thanks for your attention. I'm just about to get the marriage certificate with my boyfriend. Also, welcome everyone to send us blessings with your lucky hands. At 8 o'clock tonight, I will randomly select 20 lucky fans in the comment section and give each of them a 10,000 yuan red envelope. Who can't use the money power? With the support of money, my Weibo post directly rushed to the hot search at lightning speed. The rumor spread by Ivy that I was jealous of her happiness and maliciously slandered her was self-defeated. After the paid posters disappeared, the content that netizens really wanted to comment on appeared in her comment section. She was once again backlashed by public opinion and had to close the comment section and hide away in disgrace. When I got home, I found that Jonah was sitting outside my house. His eyes were full of bloodshot. It seemed that he hadn't slept for a long time. Seeing me, he staggered to his feet from the ground and rushed to me. Anastasia, have you really got the marriage certificate? Are you lying to me, right? I held the 2 brand new red marriage certificates in my hand. There's no point in lying to you. I'm Mrs. Leo now. Jonah stared fixedly at the 2 red certificates. His lips moved, but he couldn't say a word for a long time. It wasn't until I opened the door and was about to enter the house that his almost desperate voice rang out from behind. Anastasia, I admit that I was wrong before, but do you think this Leo is a good person? I tell you. He approached you with ulterior motives. I've checked. He doesn't have a seriously ill grandmother at all. He just wants to cheat you out of your money. I looked at Leo in confusion. He looked into my eyes seriously. I can explain. I nodded and said, Jonah seemed unable to accept it. Anastasia, he cheated you, but you didn't blame him at all? What about me? I just made such a small mistake, and you caught it and have never been willing to let it go. It's not fair. I love you. I really love you. It's just that we've been together for too long, and I forgot this feeling. Can't you really give me another chance? I was too lazy to talk and looked tired. Jonah, you say you love me? Ivy has provoked me so many times. Which time didn't you handle her gently? Jonah, I used to like you, but I'm not stupid. In fact, I knew clearly in my heart. Maybe he loved me. But more of it was probably just unwillingness. Unwilling that I didn't become a resentful woman as he expected after being discarded. Unwilling that I had a better relationship right after we separated. Jonah looked at me as if he had lost the ability to argue. Anastasia, I didn't know about those things on the internet. I've already fired Ivy. No one in the same industry will dare to hire her again. Anastasia, if you think this punishment isn't enough, I can. His words were interrupted by Leo before he could finish. Jonah, when Anastasia cared about you, you were the boss. Now that she doesn't care about you anymore, who do you think you are? I'm really glad that you made the so-called small mistake. Otherwise, how could I have the chance to become Anastasia's husband? His words were really hurtful. Jonah's breathing became heavier and heavier. It seemed that he had been greatly stimulated. He took a look at me and ran out like crazy. After that day, I never saw him again. Until Jonah's back completely disappeared, Leo took my hand. Anastasia, I'll take you to a place. Where? My home. I stared at the detached villa in front of me, my mouth gaping open for a long time and unable to close. After entering the house, Leo suddenly dropped to his knees in front of me with a thud. I'm sorry, Anastasia. Actually, I lied to you. I'm not a poor student. I'm Leo, the head of Jiangqing Enterprises. My head was buzzing. No wonder I thought the name Leo sounded a bit familiar. The head of Jiangqing. Then wouldn't even my father have to be polite to him? Suddenly, something occurred to me. Did my parents know your identity? Yes. On the day you took me home I was honest with your father. I looked at the lowered head of the man in front of me, and a sense of anger at being deceived still rose in my heart. Jonah, was it fun to deceive me? When you took that 20,000 yuan from me you were very dismissive of it, right? You must have been thinking how could there be a woman as stupid as me in the world believing whatever you said. Leo panicked. No. Really not. I didn't mean to deceive you on purpose but at that time, you liked Jonah so much and I didn't have the confidence to win over him so I. Anastasia, you're the only pure land in my heart. How could I bear to hurt you? He quickly got up from the ground. Wait for me for a moment. I have something to show you. He rushed back to the room and when he came out again, he was holding an old notebook in his hand. He handed the notebook to me. Anastasia, maybe you don't know that I've liked you for a long time. That day, I didn't say that I would forgive him. Nor did I say how I would deal with this matter. I took that notebook and went home. Although the time span was over a dozen years, there wasn't actually much that Leo had written down. There were just a few main characters, his mother, his stepfather, and a little girl. Yesterday, while my mother was out, he sneaked into my room again. While I was asleep, he touched me. It was so disgusting. I kicked him hard in the crotch and almost disabled him. I hated myself for being so weak. My mother came back. She didn't believe that her husband was a pervert with special preferences for little boys. She beat me up and then drove me out of the house. I didn't eat for 2 days. I was so hungry that I rummaged through the trash can. I'm so hungry. I passed by a primary school. A girl saw that I was pitiful and handed me her uneaten sandwich. The boy beside her said, "Be careful, he has some disease." I don't have any disease. So her name is Anastasia. What a nice name. Was that little girl actually me? But I clearly had no memory of it at all. I continued reading. I got into the high school she attended. I just wanted to watch her from a distance. It seemed that she was with the boy who grew up with her. I felt so sad in my heart, but I knew that I didn't have the right to covet something that didn't belong to me. As long as I could see her happy, that would be enough. That beast died, and my mother committed suicide after him. It seemed that she never remembered that she was a mother. I should have been sad. But after arranging their funerals, I just felt completely relaxed. In my sophomore year of high school, my biological father found me. Unexpectedly, I turned out to be the illegitimate son of a wealthy family. His legitimate son died in an accident, so he took me back. I'm so busy. It's not easy to become a qualified heir. There's so much to learn every day. When I'm under a lot of pressure, I like to take a walk around her university. That man didn't seem to like her as much anymore. On the night of her wedding, I parked my car near her house. I wanted to witness the moment when she gained happiness. But near midnight, I saw her running towards the garage with tears all over her face, speeding all the way to the riverside. I almost couldn't hold back. Fortunately, she just leaned against the car and watched the ebb and flow of the tide all night. When she gave Jonah as a gift at the birthday party, an unstoppable thought rose in my heart: my chance has come. Grandma Lee's health is getting worse and worse. She has no descendants, and she was the savior who often took care of me back then and kept me from starving to death. I wanted to help her. Damn it. Those kidnappers with no sense at all dared to kidnap me. They hit people really hard. But when the phone was connected, I knew that my girl would come to save me like a goddess descending on colorful clouds. I lied to her. I hope she'll go easy on me when she finds out. Seeing this sentence, I burst out laughing. I opened the door. Leo was standing outside. There were thorny branches on his back. "I've come to apologize." Thinking of his experiences since childhood, my expression softened and I made way for him. "Come in. If I find out that you've lied to me again next time, I won't." "Absolutely not." Seeing that my expression had eased a bit, he said in a pleading tone, "Honey, could you please not pick up random people on the street in the future?" "Why?" He blushed shyly. "If you pick up another me, I'll be jealous."